Generally, yes.
And why is that?
Well, there's a whole host of reasons, but let me put it into perspective. The first is, again, I alluded to earlier, we are under a mandate to try to educate all students in the least restrictive environment, what they call LRE, least restrictive environment, which means that we should try to educate autistic children in their community school, their local school. They're in the typical classroom that, say, if they're in fourth grade, a fourth grader would be in. Okay, so in doing so, as I mentioned before, oftentimes we have to supply an aide, and the aide requires a salary, in some cases benefits. The therapies, we have to employ a speech therapist, a physical therapist, an occupational therapist. At times we have to bring a behaviorist in to assist the child and the teacher with proper reward structures to help make the behavior more positive. So there are a whole host of costs. Now, on the other side of it, it's when the child study team agrees that perhaps the community school is not in the child's best interest to educate, and then we have to send the child to an out-of-district placement. That's, of course, always the last resort for any school district. No school district wants to send a child out of district. However, when the child study team, again, including the parent, agree that that's the best place to manage and to educate the child, that is extremely costly.
And these are services that, frankly, these children require. I mean, there's no question that the district has to provide them to make sure the child has a chance at a meaningful educational benefit. So they're really, depending upon the child, depending upon what a parent is looking for, and certain circumstances. But on the whole, the types of services you're talking about, a child requiring an aide, specialized transportation, a low student-teacher ratio. I mean, these are things really the district doesn't have a choice but to provide. Is that the case? That's generally the case, yes. And are there ways? Also, do some children require extended school year? And that was
yes, that's true.
And how much is that?
It's the number has a comma in it. Put it that way.
Okay. And why do autistic children require more, in terms of the days of service than regular education children?
Because it's identified by the teacher and the child study team, particularly though by the teacher, that the gap in summer break would put the child way behind when they return to school traditionally in September. So that therefore their education needs to be continued so that they can maintain their learning and the skills that they're acquiring.
Okay. Now, districts are in a difficult position because on the one hand, they are both required to provide these services and they want to provide these services. I mean, these are services that these children need. And that's the job of the school district, is to make sure these children are educated and are provided whatever services they require to overcome their disability. At the same time, though, these services are very expensive. And just by way of example, I mean, I'm familiar with cases where an out-of-district placement could cost well in excess of $150,000 to $160,000 for one student. I mean, does that estimate seem about right to you?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. So what does the district do? I mean, how does a district cope with that kind of a cost being thrust on it? And let me ask you this. I mean, is there federal aid available?
We receive some grants through IDEA, and there's state programs such as extraordinary aid, but they're not consistently funded, leaving the burden on the local school district, i.e. the taxpayer.
When you say they're not consistently funded, what does that mean?
Well, there's times where you're given full remuneration. There's times where you're given half. There's times where there's a certain formula that comes up. So you can never count on the whole thing being funded.
Well, let's say a district, let's say 3 autistic children move into a district and they require services, and there's no question about it. And let's say it's a $350,000 or $400,000 hit to the budget of the district. Is that something that the local municipality just has to absorb?
Yes.
Okay, can you just raise taxes?
No, you cannot.
Why not?
Well, the state imposes, last year, a 4% cap on the growth of your budget. Interestingly enough, if you were fiscally prudent, and you built a surplus, you could only have 2% of your budget in this surplus reserve, which is nowhere near usually the costs of these tuitions.
So school districts are only permitted to have a 2% surplus?
Yes.
Okay. So if you had a couple of children with special needs who moved into a district, they could wipe out your surplus in 1 year?
That's correct.
Okay. And is the state aware of this?
I'm sure they are. And I know that I'm just one superintendent, but there will probably be about 614 others across the state that would be echoing that frustration. And let me add, it's never directed towards the family, towards the student. We understand we want to carry out the services, as you mentioned, but it is a fiscal reality.
Well, no, and parents, I mean, they are advocates for their children. They're going to look for services for their children. You're an educator. Mm-hmm. You're looking to provide these services, but it just seems that to thrust the entire cost of these services, which, we have growing autism, we have expensive services, we have a capped budget situation, you're not allowed to have a surplus. I'm just wondering how long you think this is a viable recipe. How long can this go on for? Because it just seems like at some point you're going to run out of money.
Yes, and with the state being billions of dollars in debt, I agree. I don't see how long we can continue this kind of formula.
So what is the solution to it?
Well, it depends on who you ask.
I'm asking you.
Okay. Well, one of the things that I've studied or taken a look at is something as simple as to assist us when a child from another town, municipality, school district moves into our school district. That money was, for the most part, budgeted by that community. So I believe the money should follow the student, so it would help the new school district with the cost of that child's education. And that's just one little way. It would also be great if the state would give us more funds to help us with space considerations to build programs in our district. They tell us to build programs in your district and keep children within your district, but not oftentimes they don't put their money where their mouth is, quite frankly. And so that most public schools are crowded these days. If I wanted to open a program, I have no room and I would have to build.
It's interesting to me that the state has addressed, certainly blamed school districts and the number of school districts for high property taxes and the high cost of education, but it doesn't seem like the state has spent any time looking at the question of special education funding, and certainly they're not providing any more funding to the district. So you're increasingly finding yourself as a local school district required to pay for this, raising taxes to the extent that you can, eliminating your surplus. It just seems very unfair.
Yes, it does. Considering you have, so many other students to educate that need textbooks, furniture, learning manipulatives, the whole nine yards. A building.
Learning manipulatives?
Yes.
What's a learning manipulative?
Well, anything from a chart to a globe to a protractor, anything hands-on. Supplies cost money. You want to have a nice building that's clean, safe, has heat. You have utility costs. Your payroll costs rise while your aid stays stagnant.
Let me ask you quickly about this. What about when there's a conflict between parents and a school district? How does the state resolve that issue?
You usually end up in the Office of Administrative Law. And it's something that, again, I don't know of any district that ever wants to go there with a family because, truthfully, neither the family or the school district ever really wins. Special education, I believe, in Oceanport is about forming relationships, and that relationship is certainly breached or becomes adversarial when you're headed to the Office of Administrative Law. Okay.
Well, thank you very much for being here, Mr. Orefice. We appreciate it. That's all the time we have for this episode. I'd like to thank our guests for an informative discussion. Join us next time for Outlook Monmouth. And again, thank you.
Thank you.